I was screaming inside a car that wasn't moving, watching the clock on my dashboard tick past the exact minute I was supposed to be walking down the aisle, while 40 miles away, my own sister was standing at my altar, wearing my dress, holding my fiancé's hands, and reciting the vows I had written for him. She didn't just take my place that day. She planned every single second of the traffic that kept me away from my own wedding. And the moment the officiant paused, confused, was the moment everything she had built for months finally started to crack. My name is Claire, I'm 31 years old, I'm from a quiet town outside Manchester, and this is the story of the day my sister tried to marry my husband in front of 120 guests who thought they were watching me. I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened, because none of this makes sense unless you understand who my sister actually was. Sophie is 2 years younger than me. Growing up, people used to say we looked like twins, even though we weren't. Same dark hair, same height, same laugh, apparently, though I never heard it that way myself. We were close once, or at least I thought we were. But somewhere along the way, something changed in her, and I didn't see it happening until it was far too late to stop it. I met Daniel 4 years ago at a friend's dinner party in Leeds. He was training to be an architect, quiet in a way that made you lean in to listen, and he had this habit of remembering small details about you that you didn't think anyone noticed. 3 months in, he remembered that I took my tea with too much milk and always brought a spare tea bag when we went anywhere that only served instant coffee. I fell for him slowly and then all at once, the way people say it happens in the books, except it actually happened that way for me. 2 years later he proposed on a cold December evening on the same bridge where we'd had our first proper conversation, and I said yes before he even finished the question. Sophie was there for all of it. She was my maid of honor. She helped me choose the venue, a beautiful old manor house on the edge of the Peak District with ivy climbing the stone walls and a chapel on the grounds that dated back 200 years. She came dress shopping with me 3 times because I couldn't decide, and she cried, actually cried, when I finally found the one. Ivory silk, a low back, tiny pearl buttons running down the spine that took nearly 10 minutes to do up. I remember thinking, watching her face in the mirror behind me, how lucky I was to have a sister who cared this much. I didn't know then that the tears weren't happiness. I didn't know that somewhere behind that smile, she was already measuring herself against me, deciding that everything I had should have been hers. The wedding was set for a Saturday in June. Sophie had insisted on driving me to the venue herself that morning, said it would be a lovely way for the 2 of us to have one last moment together before I became somebody's wife. I should have thought it was strange that she wanted to drive separately from the rest of the bridal party, that she'd specifically asked for us to leave 45 minutes earlier than everyone else to beat the traffic. I thought she was being thoughtful. I didn't realize she was building herself an alibi. We left my parents' house at 9:30 that morning. I remember the sun was out, properly out, the kind of June morning that felt like a blessing. My dress was hanging in the back seat in its garment bag, my hair was already half done, and I had my shoes in a box on my lap because I didn't trust myself not to scuff them getting in and out of the car. Sophie was driving. She'd offered, said she wanted me to relax and not worry about the roads on my own wedding day. I remember thanking her for that. I remember actually thanking her. About 20 minutes into the drive, she told me her sat-nav was showing a faster route, some back road that would avoid the roadworks on the main route into the peaks. I didn't think anything of it. Why would I? It was Sophie. So we turned off the motorway and onto a smaller road, and within 10 minutes, we were sitting in traffic that wasn't moving at all. Not slow-moving. Not crawling. Completely, entirely stopped. At first it was just irritating. I remember laughing about it, actually laughing, saying something like, of course this would happen today. Sophie kept apologizing, kept saying she didn't understand it, that her sat-nav had shown this as clear. She kept checking her phone, frowning at it, telling me she was trying to find another way round. 40 minutes went by. Then an hour. I started to feel something shift in my chest, a tightness that wasn't just wedding day nerves anymore. I tried to call the venue. My phone showed no signal. I remember staring at the little bars in the corner of the screen, tapping it, turning it off and on again, convinced it was a fault with the network out here in the middle of nowhere. I didn't know yet that Sophie had gone into my phone the night before, while I was asleep after my hen do the week prior when she'd stayed over to help me pack my overnight bag, and had quietly disabled my location sharing and my emergency contacts feature under the guise of optimizing my battery for the big day. I found that out much later. At the time, all I knew was that I was cut off, stuck, and the clock was moving in a way that felt like it was mocking me. By 11:30, I was properly panicking. Guests were supposed to be seated by 12. The ceremony was due to start at 12:30. Sophie kept telling me to breathe, kept telling me everyone would understand, that these things happen, that the venue coordinator would simply push things back. She was so calm. Looking back now, that calmness should have terrified me. She wasn't panicking because she already knew exactly how this was going to unfold. She had built the whole morning around this traffic jam like a stage set, and I was sitting inside it with absolutely no idea. At some point I asked her to try calling Daniel from her phone since mine had no signal. She said her battery had died. I remember looking over at her phone in the cup holder, seeing the screen lit up as she used it to check the sat-nav not 2 minutes earlier, and something in my stomach twisted, but I pushed the thought away because I couldn't let myself believe my own sister would lie to me on the worst morning of my life. That's the thing about people who love someone the way I loved Sophie. You give them the benefit of the doubt right up until the moment the truth is standing in front of you with nowhere left to hide. While I was sitting in that car, convinced my wedding was falling apart around me from pure bad luck, Sophie's plan was already moving into its next stage nearly 40 miles away. She had arranged, weeks earlier, for a final dress-fitting adjustment to happen at the venue itself rather than at the bridal shop, claiming it would be more convenient on the morning of the wedding. What that actually meant was that a spare copy of my dress, altered to fit her, had been quietly delivered to the bridal suite 2 days before, hidden in a garment bag identical to mine, tucked into the back of the wardrobe where nobody thought to look twice. Sophie and I are close enough in build that with the right adjustments, a dress made for me could be made to fit her almost as easily. She had taken my exact measurements from the bridal shop's file months earlier, when she'd offered to collect the alteration notes on my behalf because I was working long hours that week. I gave her that job because I trusted her. I gave her nearly everything, actually, if I'm honest with myself now, and she used every ounce of that trust as a tool. At around 11 that morning, while I was still stuck in gridlock believing I still had time, Sophie's best friend, Nadia, who I later learned had been in on parts of the plan without fully understanding the scale of it, created a distraction in the bridal suite. She told my bridesmaids that one of the flower arrangements had been delivered wrong and needed urgent attention outside, pulling them away from the room for nearly 20 minutes. In that window, someone, we later confirmed it was Sophie's boyfriend at the time, a man named Ryan who worked as a driver and had access to a second vehicle, drove Sophie the back way to the venue using a route that bypassed the gridlock entirely, dropped her at a service entrance near the kitchens, and left before anyone noticed a second car at all. Sophie walked into that bridal suite already half-dressed, her hair and makeup done to mirror mine as closely as possible, having practiced for weeks in secret using photographs of my hairstyle trial. She put on my dress in under 6 minutes. She knew exactly how those 10 minutes worth of pearl buttons worked because she had watched me do them up in the mirror on 3 separate fitting days, memorizing the order, the tension, the way the fabric needed to be pulled to sit right. When the bridesmaids came back into the room, she kept her back to them, dabbing at her face with a tissue, saying she was feeling emotional and needed a quiet minute. Nobody questioned it. Why would they? Brides cry before their weddings all the time. She kept the veil down longer than usual, claimed she wanted the reveal to be a surprise for Daniel, something I actually had considered doing myself, which meant nobody found the request strange at all. She'd thought of everything. She had turned my own personality against me, using the parts of me she knew best to build a disguise nobody could see through. At the same time, back in the car, I was trying everything I could to reach anyone. I eventually managed to flag down a passing driver going the opposite direction, who let me use his phone. I called the venue's landline, and the woman who answered told me, with confusion in her voice, that the bride had already arrived and was getting ready, that everything was on schedule. I remember the relief that flooded through me in that moment, thinking there had been some mix-up, that maybe the wedding party car ahead of us had arrived and the wires had gotten crossed. I told Sophie the good news. I told her someone must already be there sorting things. She smiled at me in that moment, and I remember it now as one of the coldest smiles I have ever seen, though at the time I read it as relief. What I didn't know was that while I was making that call, back at the venue, a wedding planner named Priya was fielding a string of text messages that appeared to come from my phone number, sent the night before from my own laptop while I slept, which Sophie had accessed using a password she'd watched me type in 100 times over the years. The messages told Priya that the bride wanted the ceremony pushed to 1 o'clock instead of 12:30 because of a small family matter and asked her not to worry the groom with the details. Priya, trusting the messages because they came from my verified number, quietly informed the officiant and adjusted the schedule, buying Sophie the exact window of time she needed. I have read that thread of messages since. Reading my own words that I never wrote, in a tone crafted to sound exactly like me, was one of the strangest and most violating experiences of my life. Sophie had studied the way I text. The little abbreviations I use. The way I always sign off with a small X. She had built a version of me convincing enough to fool a professional who had worked with me for 8 months. By the time the traffic finally began to clear, it was 12:15. I remember the moment the cars ahead started moving like it was a physical release, my whole body sagging with relief, thinking we could still just about make it if we drove straight there. I didn't know that straight there would take us another 40 minutes on the correct roads, because Sophie, still playing her part perfectly, accidentally took one more wrong turn near the final stretch, adding another 15 minutes onto a journey that should have taken 10. I have asked myself so many times since why I didn't see it. Why didn't I question the wrong turns, the dead phone, the missing signal, all stacking up one after another like dominoes she had lined up months in advance? The answer I've come to is simple and painful. I trusted her completely. And people who are planning to betray you count on exactly that. They don't need to be clever enough to fool a stranger. They only need to be trusted enough that you stop looking for the lie. We arrived at the manor house at 1:08. I remember the gravel crunching under the tires, the sight of the chapel doors closed, the string quartet's faint music drifting out from inside. I remember thinking, with a kind of desperate hope, that maybe they really had pushed the ceremony back, that maybe I would burst through those doors and everyone would simply be waiting, relieved, and we would laugh about this in a year. I grabbed my shoes. I didn't even have my dress on yet. It was still in its garment bag because we'd planned to have me change in a room near the entrance rather than travel in it. I ran across that gravel in my socks, Sophie trailing a few steps behind me with an expression I mistook for concern. And through the glass panels either side of the chapel doors, I saw it. I saw a bride standing at the altar, her back to me, dark hair pinned exactly the way mine had been pinned in my trial 3 weeks earlier, wearing my dress, my actual dress, holding the hands of the man I was supposed to be marrying. For a moment, I genuinely could not process what I was looking at. My mind tried to build an explanation that made sense, some emergency stand-in, some prank, anything other than the truth. And then I looked beside me, and Sophie was gone from where she'd been standing a moment before. And the tightness that had been building in my chest all morning turned into something else entirely, something colder, as I finally understood. I pushed through those doors. I don't remember deciding to do it. I just remember the sound of them slamming against the stone walls, the music stopping mid-note, 120 heads turning toward me at once. The officiant, a lovely older woman named Reverend Ellis, had just asked the couple to join hands for the exchange of vows, and had paused, her brow furrowed, because something had caught her attention. Later she told me it was the birthmark. Sophie has a small, crescent-shaped birthmark on the inside of her left wrist, one I don't have, one that had been hidden under the sleeve of the dress during the walk down the aisle but had shifted into view the moment she extended her hand for the ring. The silence in that chapel in the seconds after the doors slammed is something I don't think I will ever fully describe, because there are no words large enough for it. 120 people frozen in their seats. Daniel's face, first confused, then draining of color as he looked between the woman standing in front of him and me standing in the doorway in my socks, holding a pair of unworn wedding shoes. Sophie's shoulders, stiff, unmoving, her back still to the room, as if staying perfectly still could somehow undo what was happening. Someone in the front row gasped. I think it was my mother. I walked up that aisle in my socks, past 120 guests who had no idea what they were watching, and I reached the altar, and I lifted the veil myself. Sophie's face underneath it was pale, streaked with the beginnings of tears that I don't believe were for anyone but herself. She didn't say sorry. Not then. She said, and I will never forget these words as long as I live, I was going to tell you eventually. As if there had been some version of this plan that ended with honesty, some future where she imagined I would simply understand and forgive her for trying to steal my entire life while I sat trapped in traffic she had engineered. Daniel stepped back from her so fast he nearly knocked over the small table holding the rings. I remember the look on his face wasn't anger first. It was horror. Pure, physical horror, the look of a man realizing he had been seconds away from placing a ring on the hand of a woman who was not the one he loved, who had been counting on his blindfolded trust in a ceremony to pull off the greatest betrayal I have ever heard of in my life. What followed was chaos in the quietest sense of the word. Reverend Ellis, to her enormous credit, calmly announced that the ceremony would not be continuing and asked the guests to make their way to the reception marquee while the family resolved a private matter. My mother was crying. My father, a man I have seen cry perhaps twice in my life, was standing utterly still, staring at Sophie like he was looking at a stranger wearing his daughter's face. Daniel wouldn't look at either of us for several minutes. He simply walked outside, alone, and stood by the old stone wall at the edge of the chapel garden with his hands pressed against his eyes. Sophie tried to explain herself in the vestry afterward, in front of our parents and me, and Daniel once he'd composed himself enough to come back inside. She said she'd fallen in love with Daniel the year before, secretly, that she'd told herself it wasn't real, that she'd tried to bury it, and that watching us plan the wedding had become unbearable to her. She said some part of her genuinely believed that if she could just get through the ceremony, if the vows were said and the ring was on her finger, everyone would simply accept it, that love, in her words, finds its way. I remember staring at her while she said this, trying to find some flicker of the sister I grew up with, and finding instead someone I didn't recognize at all, someone who had spent months constructing lies with the same care most people put into planning something beautiful. The traffic jam, we later confirmed through phone records and Ryan's own statement once the police became involved, had been partially engineered using a fake accident report phoned into traffic services from a burner phone, timed precisely to create a closure on that back road at the exact moment we would be passing through it. It wasn't random bad luck. It was a trap, built weeks in advance, tested twice on quiet weekday mornings when Sophie had taken that same route for a change of scenery, clocking exactly how long the detour would hold a car in place. In the days that followed, I learned about the fake texts to the wedding planner, the disabled location sharing on my phone, the duplicate dress ordered under a slightly altered name at the bridal shop 3 months earlier, paid for using money from a savings account she'd been quietly building for over a year. Every piece of it had been planned with a precision that still makes my hands shake when I think about it too long. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a campaign. The venue itself, once the truth came out, was left with a cancelled ceremony, a marquee full of confused guests, and a catering order for a wedding breakfast nobody was in any state to enjoy. My father, in the numb hours that followed, made the decision that the cost of that day, the flowers, the band, the catering, the venue hire, the dress alterations Sophie had commissioned in secret to fit herself, would not be absorbed quietly as a family embarrassment. Every invoice connected to what Sophie had done, every deposit spent enabling her deception, was itemized, and months later, after a great deal of difficult conversation and, eventually, legal correspondence, she was made to pay every single penny of it back. It wasn't about the money by that point. None of us needed the money back in any way that mattered. It was about making sure that what she had done had a cost attached to it that she could not simply talk her way out of, the way she had talked her way through every other part of that day. Sophie was formally reported for the incident, and while much of what she did existed in a strange gray area of family betrayal rather than clear criminal offense, the falsified emergency call to traffic services and the unauthorized access to my accounts and devices were not gray areas at all. She faced a police caution and, separately, a civil claim for the costs she had caused, which she ultimately settled by handing over savings that, I later found out with a kind of bitter irony, had originally been set aside for her own wedding one day. Daniel and I did not get married that June. For a long time, I genuinely didn't know if we ever would. What Sophie didn't just steal an afternoon from us. It planted something ugly at the center of what should have been one of the happiest days of our lives, and it took a long time to dig that out and look at what remained underneath it. We went to counseling, both together and separately. Daniel needed time to process what it meant that someone had been willing to stand in front of him and lie with her whole body for the chance to take my place. I needed time to understand how I had lived alongside someone capable of this for 31 years without ever truly seeing it. We did eventually marry, quietly, the following spring, in a small registry office with fewer than 20 guests, no elaborate dress with pearl buttons down the spine, no chapel with ivy on the walls. Just the two of us, our parents, and the people who had actually stood by us through the mess that came after. It was smaller than I ever imagined my wedding would be, but it was, in every way that mattered, entirely mine, and entirely real, and nobody but me walked down that aisle. As for Sophie, I haven't spoken to her in over a year now. There was no dramatic final phone call, no screaming match to close the chapter. Just a quiet, permanent line drawn after everything settled, a decision that some kinds of betrayal don't get a path back from, no matter how much shared history sits behind them. My parents still see her occasionally, and I don't ask them to choose between us, but I have been honest with them about what I need, which is distance, real distance, the kind that lets a wound like this actually close instead of being picked at every family gathering for the rest of my life. People sometimes ask me if I regret how publicly it all unraveled, whether I wish I'd pulled her aside quietly instead of lifting that veil in front of 120 guests. I don't. Because for months, she had controlled every version of the story that reached anyone else, my own phone, my own words, my own image reflected back at the people who loved me. The one thing she couldn't control was the moment I walked through those doors and refused to let her finish what she started. That moment was the only part of that entire day that was completely, undeniably mine, and I have never once wished I'd handled it differently. If you made it all the way to the end of this story, thank you for staying with me through it. It wasn't an easy one to tell. If it moved you, made you angry, or made you grateful for the people in your own life who would never do something like this, let me know down in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this, make sure you hit subscribe and like this video so you never miss the next one.